Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, some literary science fiction. This is my review of I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. So this is one of those books that's difficult to talk about without spoiling. So I'm going to be really careful in this review and make sure I don't spoil it. It's difficult because it's a book with a very simple setup, a very simple plot, and it's very short as well. It's only about 200 pages long. But it's a book that manages to pack, I felt, a huge amount of depth and interest into those 200 pages. I thought this was a truly wonderful book, and it's a book I haven't stopped thinking about since I finished reading it. It's a book that appears to be incredibly simple, but is actually just full of richness. I really thought this was a great book. So let me tell you about it. So it was originally published in French in 1995. The English translation was done by Scwartz, and it's a really good translation. I think translations sometimes can be, if they're too literal, they can feel kind of slightly mechanical, slightly forced. If you try and literally translate each word, you end up with something that doesn't flow. That's definitely not the case for this. It feels like a very well written book. The prose is a pleasure to read. So it's got a very simple setup, and I'll tell you what that setup is, but then I won't tell you any more about the plot because it would spoil it. So the setup is there are 40 women, one of whom is the narrator, who's like a teenage girl who's about 15 or 16, who are imprisoned in a bunker. They are guarded by men who they're never able to speak to, and that's it. That's it. You don't know where they are. You don't know why they're there. You don't know when the book takes place. You don't know any of that. All you know is what the teenage girl tells you about their surroundings. And she is someone who doesn't remember the world before the bunker. She doesn't remember men. Hence the title of the book. So her only experience of men is these kind of distant guards, one of whom she kind of starts fantasizing about. That is the setup of the book. That's what happens in the kind of first couple of chapters, and then the plot progresses from there in a really interesting way. So that seems like a very simple setup. It is a very simple setup. It felt to me like a YA kind of a setup. So that kind of teenage heroine, a slightly dystopian feel to it. It felt like this could have been a YA book, but it uses that simple setup to reflect on basically what it is to be human in a really deep and interesting way. This book talks, it manages to talk about kind of all of human society, in my opinion, all the different things that make up humanity, that the things that we need to survive, both the things we need to survive physically and the things we need to survive spiritually. I think it does a really fantastic job of packing a huge amount of thought and meaning into a very small number of pages. And it's really gripping as well. That simple plot and your desire to answer those questions, why are they there? When is the book taking place? Where are they? All of those questions kind of get gradually evolved upon as the book progresses in a way that is really gripping. So there's these kind of central mysteries at the centre of the book that make it a compelling read, as well as it being, as I say, a very thoughtful read about humanity, about what it is that makes us us. So yeah, a really interesting book and incredibly moving as well. It's a book that left me deeply affected when I finished it. It's really gets into your bones, this book. It's not necessarily disturbing, but it's certainly disquieting at times, and as I say, it's a very emotional read. I can't tell you why because it would spoil too much of the book. But this is a a book that deserves to be read. So if you haven't read it, I urge you to read it. As I say, it's only 200 pages or so. It won't take you long to read at all. Despite the fact that there's a lot of depth in there, it's an easy read in many ways. There isn't a lot of narrative complexity. There aren't a lot of characters to juggle. It's a fairly simple book to read, but it's a book that, certainly for me, as I say, has really, really stuck with me. So I do urge you to read it. So it's a couple of days after I filmed the main part of this video. I'd filmed it, I'd edited it, I'd uploaded it. It was all queued up and ready to go. And something kept on nagging at me that there was something else I needed to say about this book. And I finally realised what it was. So I'm going to do something I don't normally do and add in this additional bit to the video to say that thing. It's two things really. So one of the things is just about the kind of science fiction I enjoy. And I Who Have Never Known Men is definitely that. And that is the kind of science fiction that takes a really simple concept and just runs with it. So it takes a simple idea at its start and then just develops that idea. And that is exactly what this book does. It takes that jumping off point that I've described of the women in the bunker, and then it just progresses from there. It just builds and builds and builds on that concept. And there are so many great science fiction books that you can describe in just that one sentence that gives you the setup that is immediately intriguing and makes you want to experience them, and that then go to really interesting places. So that was the first thing I wanted to say. The other thing is that I think that science fiction is a genre that does reflection on society really, really well, or can do. And this book definitely does that. And I think the reason that it does that is science fiction typically puts you in another world, another place, another setup. So as I've said, the beginning of this book, the women in the bunker, there's something mysterious about it. You don't know where they are, you don't know when it is. So you know that you are not in like day-to-day society. You are somewhere other. And what that does is it makes you reflect on the differences between the society of the book, the setting of the book, and our own society. But you do that without really thinking about it, and you can do it without the author having to labour their points, because they're not writing about the real world. They're just describing a different place to you. They can almost like embed in that reflections on the real world that don't feel forced. They don't feel like overly done. They don't feel overly like strenuous for your brain to take in, because it just happens naturally. You read about this other place and you instinctively reflect on the differences between this place that you're reading about and the place that the world that you know from a day-to-day perspective. I think science fiction can do that really, really well, and I think I Who Have Never Known Men definitely does it really well. And then the other thing about that kind of feeling of otherness that's interesting in this book is that central character, while she's in this bunker with these 39 other women, she is different from the other women. She doesn't remember the world before. So there's a sense of otherness in her perception of things. She knows that she's different in some way. And that allows her to reflect kind of almost as an outsider on the society that she's in, and then our absorbing of that society makes us reflect on our society. So I think this is a really multi-layered book, and it does what it does in a really interesting way, but in a way that is immediately digestible and engrossing. And I think that is why I found it so powerful. Anyway, I will leave it there for the second time and say, as always, thank you very much for watching. I hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.